We'll be dealing with Sex Offender Registration Act, scams and frauds, and then trafficking, among others. Attorney General's Southeast Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force. So we have several partners in our profession. One is the community, two is the schools, three are other agencies, county attorney's office, county clerk's office, treasurers, cities, city clerks. We want everybody to make sure that they feel comfortable calling and talking to us. We're reporting it somehow. We get reports over Facebook. We get reports in the mail. We get information via email to the county generic website. Sometimes people walk in, and that's what we want, people to be able to feel free to communicate with the sheriff's office, and we'll try and resolve their problems best we can. So one of the things that impacts all the communities would be the presence and the laws regarding registered sex offenders. So what I want to do is read you the legislative findings on why they created this law. And is the legislature finds that sex offenders present a high risk to commit repeat offenses. The legislature further finds that efforts of law enforcement agencies to protect their communities, conduct investigations, and quickly apprehend sex offenders are impaired by the lack of available information about individuals who have pleaded guilty to or have been found guilty of sex offenses who live, work, or attend school in their jurisdiction. The legislature further finds that the state policy should assist in efforts of local law enforcement agencies to protect their communities by requiring sex offenders to register with local law enforcement agencies as provided by the Sex Offender Registration Act. So that's what we go off. So we go off of the chapter 29 and the statutes regarding sex offenders. There's some things that are very, very basic and they stand out throughout the nation. And that is that 0.3% of the population will wind up being a registered sex offender. So that's 3 out of every 1,000. And the statistics pretty much hold up. If you multiply that times 22,000 people in Gage County, or 21,500, you should have somewhere around 65, 66 registered sex offenders. There are currently 64 registered sex offenders in Gage County. So the statute requires that the sex offenders report information and changes of information to the sheriff's office in the county where they reside. So the sheriff's office becomes the steward of all that information. We forward that to the Nebraska State Patrol Sex Offender Registration Unit. It's kind of a cumbersome task. We've talked with the county attorney's office on how we want to proceed on violations. We want to document things appropriately so we can have because each violation of that is a felony. So if they don't tell us that they're living someplace, that would be a felony. If they don't tell us that they're working at someplace, that would be a felony violation for failure to report it. And the reason that information is there is so that there is a public website. Is everybody aware of that? We're checking on sex offenders. Put out by Nebraska State Patrol. You type in, do a search engine, Nebraska sex offenders. It should be one of the first 2 or 3 that pop up. You can then check either by name, or area, or region, or an actual physical address. And that is just to help the community with, okay, this person living next to me, can I trust them? Can I not trust them? It's still up to you whether you can or not. One of the things that we find is there's a lot of recidivism and sometimes other criminal conduct involved with sex offenders. But the statutes are not as restrictive as some people might think. It basically limits where they can live, and that is, the restrictions are on schools and daycare centers. So there's nothing in a state statute that prohibits them from being a coach on a baseball team, an employee at a daycare center, going to a public pool or public park. So they can do those things unless there's a restriction on their probation, if they're on probation. So you have this information, and you have to decide if this is the person you want to have married. There is a tendency for recidivism in this. They committed a sex offense once, they may or more likely to commit it again. What it helps us with knowing who lives there, who drives this vehicle. Okay, that would be a good place for us to start with the investigation. If there's a exposure at a public park, or a child is maybe potentially abducted, I think one of the first things we'd look at. And I'm going to go over some cases that we had in the last few years.
Question: if, let's say, the S moves here, he comes to your office and registers, then, and he's living in the county here, then what other contact do you ever have with that person?
For a registered sex offender?
Right.
Right. So they are required to report changes of information, like changes where if they move, they get a new vehicle, if they get a change jobs, phone numbers, things like that. They're required to report that. We do compliance checks on them. So we'll go out and I could go today and go up to Adams and check on a person. Say, yep, he's still living there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm curious, what, after they report, I mean, what other things are ever done? Nothing unless there's a complaint or you do some follow-ups.
Well, that's a good question. So we will, each sex offender, there's 3 different levels. They're either report for 15 years to their sex offender registry, 25 years, or lifetime. If they're a 15-year offender, then they would have to at least come in and verify the information once a year during the month of their birth. If they're 25 years, it's twice a year during the month of their birth and 6 months thereafter. So they have a whole month to come in and verify this information. If they fail to come in, that's a felony violation as well. And that does occur. They have an entire month to come in, and they decide not to. And then lifetime would be every 3 months, month of their birth and 3 months thereafter. Yes, ma'am.
So like say an organization or a team or a school has a rule that you have to notify your sex offender, such as like our Beatrice YMCA does not allow. What trumps, your state statute of what they can do or that organization's?
So they are not required to, there's nothing in state statute that prohibits them. So if they did do work there or coach or something like that,
Yeah.
that's not a violation of the law. It could be a violation of your terms of agreement or your contract or whatever. And
Although that organization or an organization has that rule, that is not.
there's nothing saying they have to be allowed into it. So if you have a prohibition against that, that would be fine. It wouldn't be a violation if they are on there,
Okay.
unless they're getting paid and it's a full-time employment. But the YMCA also has a daycare, correct?
Oh.
Right, so that prohibits them from living within 500 feet of the property line to the property line. So basically all that stuff across on Scott Street they would not be allowed to do that. But that would be a the city has to have a local ordinance on it, which Beatrice does. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, they still can do it, but that's why the information's there for you to be able to, as a public, be able to check and verify, and then make a determination on whether you want to proceed. Yes, sir.
Most organizations that she's talking about have a requirement that you do a criminal background check on these potential employees. If you work with children, like the coach in the YMCA, coaches have to be run through.
But they can still coach. But they can
No.
No. Okay.
Because it's out of the game, they can actually have it thrown out.
But it wouldn't be a criminal violation
Right.
if they did happen to slip
Depends
off.
on if they choose to leave or not.
Yeah.
Do different states have different statutes and, like what are some weird ones?
So, and it's my home state, remember, but Missouri, which they always seem to have these unique things, but They will not allow them to wear a Halloween costume on Halloween. They prohibit them from being within city parks, so for a certain distance. So we did have a sex offender here that got tired of being harassed by us checking on him. He moved to Rockport, Missouri, like just left that night, went and left, and 2 weeks later he was back because they had all those restrictions, and basically he could not live anywhere in Rockport based on the zoning from a school or a daycare or a city park. So some states are more restrictive. Ours is probably, I think, very realistic and it's very easy. Who are you? Where do you live? Where do you drive? Where do you work? Where do you go to school? And if you can't remember that or you forget to tell that, that's on you. Yes, sir.
Are all sex offenders male?
The vast majority are. There are 2 here in Gage County that are females. So, and that brings up another point I wanted to make. In Nebraska, you're not going to get the classic one that everybody says, "Oh, I was peeing at night outside of a school and there was no kids around. I got put on the sex offender registry." That will not put you on the sex offender registry in Nebraska. There'll be a crime with a sexual assault or some sexual aspect to it. You murder somebody and there was a sexual assault, you can be put on the sex offender registry and get probation or get parole for that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The only time I was on the jury was a sex offender case, and found it an emotionally charged thing with the jury and everybody. In your job, is that probably the most emotional type of cases to do?
Are we talking about the actual offense of the
Yeah, or
assault?
investigating the assaults and stuff.
They're very, very difficult, and that's for everybody involved. Deputies that respond, the family members, HHS, the county attorney's office who has to look at all this evidence and deal with the victims and deal with the courts and try and obtain a conviction or the best pursuit of justice, whatever that outcome will be. They are very difficult, and you want to make sure that you have a good support system, a wife that supports you at home, family members, counseling if you need it, because some of the stuff you would see would be very horrific. And that's at the scene with, whatever's going on, too. So, I appreciate you serving on the jury, though. So it's very intensive. We do a good job. We document who comes in. What we do is we have them, there's a 4-page form that the State Patrol uses to input the data. We give them that form. It has everything that they have to put down that's required. They fill it out, their address, their name, their vehicles, and sign it and turn it in, and we input that into the computer, and it goes up to the sex offender registration unit. So to me, there's no tricking. Here's the information you have to put down. You didn't put it down, or you put down false information. That helps us in our investigation. Here's the document you signed. You put a false address. And that'll be one of the cases I'm going to talk about very quickly. So I talked with Ron a little bit earlier about some of the societal pressures. This is just strictly enforcement of the law, but there are societal pressures. NAMBLA we were talking about. Is anybody familiar with what that is? It's the North American Man-Boy Love Association. They're trying to normalize pedophilia, sex between adult males and juveniles. The media pushes it all the time. It's up to the society, whatever society wants, that's what the rules and laws will be set by. So we get involved, whatever side you're on, support that, support people that support your views. Elect them to office to make the laws. So in our communities, there's 64 registered sex offenders in Gage County, and that fluctuates up and down, who moves in, who moves out, who passes away, who comes back. Beatrice will have 48 that registered addresses in the city, 4 of them, plus 4 just outside, Adams, there's one in the Adams area, one in the Pickerel area, 6 in Wymore, 1 in Blue Springs, 1 in Virginia, Nebraska, 1 in Liberty, and 1 in DeWitt. So as you can see, they're throughout our county. And it will change depending on the month, but Barnston, Portland, Claytonia, Ellis, Philly, Odell, Rockford, and Lanham have none registered currently. So I want to talk about some of the cases and how our ability to communicate with the public and how we see it as there's other issues going on that happen with registered sex offenders. A couple years ago, we had a gentleman, registered sex offender, flew in to Lincoln. The family picked him up. He was supposed to just stay for a couple days, and he wound up living like 200 feet from Beatrice Middle School. Registered sex offender. He was told to go register. He didn't, told again. After about a week and a half, they only have 3 business days. So after a week and a half, we got together with the Beatrice Police Department, and they have a school resource officer. The school had heard about it. It was becoming an issue. This guy was 38. He was hanging out with a girl that was in that middle school on a special needs program, visiting her. Since he had not registered, we went and made the arrest. County Attorney's Office prosecuted on it, and he's now not in Nebraska. We had another gentleman moved down here from Lincoln. He immediately began a spree of financial activity, including purchasing cars, not registering them. I think Mr. Harris can be able to tell who these people are after a while if I give enough details. Making false purchases, defrauding people, renting things, and then turning around immediately and selling the stuff in Ace Rent Center. That was how he'd make money. You know, you pay $50 for a $1,500 living room set, and you sell it for $800, and you made a profit. He was wound up. We arrested him for purchasing or having vehicles that he didn't register. Another gentleman has lobbied the state legislature to make it more difficult to child report sexual assault. He wanted it to be more difficult for that child to be able to report to law enforcement authorities. He failed to verify 1 month. He was arrested. Another gentleman right across from the YMCA, actually just down the street, a little ways. He was living in those townhomes there, but he wasn't allowed to be there because of it was like a Section 8 type housing. We had to do a little bit of staking out. We'd see him there late at night. Next morning, we'd see him leaving. Did that for about a week, and we were able to arrest him because he was living at that address and not reporting. Another gentleman who's now in his late 20s, he's kind of stopped maturing around age 14 or 15. He always wants to hang out with the 14 or 15-year-old girls. Meets them at the county fair, you know, because we all let our teenagers go running around, right? And a teenage girl, a teenage boy is going to be, hey, this person thinks I'm cool, not realizing that there's ulterior motives. He's registered a false address. He was arrested. Another gentleman is a suspected arsonist. So we're keep tracks on his movements as close as we can. Another one, this was about 6 years ago. He came up from another state. What he had been doing was he went to followed 13, 14-year-old girls into a library, made sexual acts with them, was convicted, came up here when he was on parole from that state, and we got, this is in Wymore, we got a report of a suspicious man following these 2 young girls. They went to the library, he followed a man, then he took off. We couldn't figure it out. They didn't have a license plate, there's no video. But one of our other deputies who worked in probation said, hey, that sounds like my guy on probation. Turns out, yes, it was. And he was driving a vehicle that he hadn't registered, which is a violation, so we arrested him, cleared that case. So you can see how that reporting that information, we found out he was there because he registered the address but not the vehicle. once we drove by the house, there was the vehicle right there. Another young man, in his mid-20s, likes to hang out with the 15, 16-year-old juveniles. He continually goes after the teenage girls. He was reported to be at the pool in Beatrice with a 15-year-old girl. Show up, yes, he was there. That, once again, is not a crime, but as we investigated further, we found out that he not reported some other information. He was arrested. Another gentleman continually fabricates stories or is hard to track. We'll say he's transient, meaning doesn't have a place to stay. We wind up finding out that yes, he's actually staying at this place, but he's living next to us or in the community and not reporting it. His claim is that he wants to get the disability for PTSD from being a sex offender. Another gentleman who's on the sex offender registry came from California, and reading his file, his victim claims that over several years, she was victimized 1,500 times by this gentleman. It's 1,500 times, separate different times. Another gentleman moved down after getting out of prison. He's registered here. He's what they refer to as a campus rapist. Back in the 80s, there were about 9 or 10 very violent sexual assaults occurred involving UNL students. And they still, to this day, track them. They'll call or contact us and ask if there's any updates on it. It's what they do for a threat assessment for the university. Sometimes the sex offender will reoffend. Sometimes they'll move in with another sex offender and reoffend on that sex offender's child or stepchild. There's drug use. Sometimes they live in unreported addresses. They float back and forth, so we're living that shit. So we do track them. We do track them as much as we can. That's where we rely on the community. If someone calls in, obviously I don't work 24 hours a day, but that information will get to me. And maybe what you're reporting is not a violation, like they're at the pool. But when we start looking into it more, it's like, well, they have a vehicle that they're not reporting, or they're living at this place, not reporting it. So we'll investigate that, and if we can make an arrest, we will. One gentleman moved out to Ellis, parked a camper trailer there, took off, and never came back. That was the only address he reported. So if that's the address he reported and he's not staying there ever, that means he's staying someplace else. And we found him staying just right next to, which one's the school over there on the west side? Cedar Elementary. Yep, he was a few blocks from there. So what I want to just point out is that it's very important that we have these things reported to us. We investigate them fully. We do check on them as much as we can. We don't want to harass the person. You know, our purpose on this is not to harass them, but just to verify that they're complying with the law. So,
corresponding person to you in the Beatrice Police Department?
any law enforcement officer in Nebraska can investigate these, but what we found out in working with the county attorney's office, it's probably most efficient if the information comes to me, because we're the repository for that information. We have the paper files, but we work with the other agencies on this. Did that answer your question? So, we're running out of time. I also want to talk about scams and fraud. Just remember that there's always people out there that will try and take money from you. Make sure that you tell your associates, your family, we need you to report things right away. Don't fall. Some red flags, meaning that's probably a fraud, is they want secrecy. Don't tell anybody. They demand some type of payment or you're going to be arrested if you don't do this. They won't let you hang up the phone. They'll say they're, grandma or grandpa, which there's maybe a couple of you in here that might fit that role. And when you answer Justin, and they'll say, yeah, I'm going to come up with some story. And they want you to send the money to them. We did have a gentleman, not a grandpa scam, but they were trying to purchase something on Facebook. This was very recently. Sent $7,000 and wired this money to this gentleman. Never got anything, never got anything, never got anything. Then they reported to the sheriff's office. We wound up finding out that the gentleman is already, just that day, got arrested down in Georgia for the same type of thing. And these people were the 25th victim that this agency had taken a report on. And when I was talking with the detective there, he said, oh, he's got like a $70,000 truck and all these ATVs and just in a nice place. So we know where he is. We can get a warrant for him, but we will be like the 25th person in line, 25th agency in line potentially. So they're talking about trying to get to go through the federal investigation in the federal court case. The internet is great, but always make sure you watch yourself. People with way more experience than me, I'm talking like 15, 16-year-old people, they can get scammed. You just have to be careful, make sure everything's up to date. Don't fall for the pressure. If it thinks it's too good to be true, it probably is. If you won something from Publishers Clearinghouse or something like that, they're not going to make you pay a fee. That's one of the common things we find. Oh, you'll win this money, but we need however much money they can get out of it. And we do have people that, because they won't tell a family member or they want to keep it a secret because they don't want the grandkid to get in trouble, send thousands of dollars to these people and it's gone. If you pay if they ask you to pay by a gift card buy a gift card to pay for something, either a warrant or a fine or something like that, it's a scam. No government agency or business wants to have a gift card. Yes, sir.
What's the most money you've ever heard of admitting Gage County being scammed?
One was $56,000, and she had taken out a loan and taken from her retirement. But they just kept telling her, "Oh, we're going to." And then after they had gotten like $45,000 from her, these other people said, "Oh, we'll help you, but we need a fee to get money." So she sent like another $11,000, and it's cash and it's gone. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's not a question, but it's kind of a comment. I mentioned once that I never had the scam where they call you, tell your grandson is in jail and that. Unfortunately, I did get a call like that last fall. I used some swear words that I hadn't used for a while. But that guy just said, oh, and hung up.
Well, good for you. Sometimes if they get a hold of you and they think they got you and you say, oh, it doesn't sound like you, they'll say, oh, I was involved in an accident and my mouth is all wrapped up. I'm sort of talking like this. And then, because we're all trusting and good people, we want to believe it, and we don't want their mom, dad to get mad at them. But good for you, sir.
These can be both male and female.
The scammers,
Yes.
they can. You may have talked to several different people, but it's the same one or two. And if you get scammed once, you'll be a target again. Any other questions or anything else that's for the good of the order? Hope that was right on. Thank you. Nice job. Thank you very much.